much for tuning in to another episode of the Relocate podcast. So, today I have my very first guest who is not even from the United States of America. I'm so happy to have this conversation today with Chris Bex. He is from London originally, from the UK. He currently lives in Australia. He moved there to be with his family. He's going to talk a lot more about his experience and just how life has been for him. Um, Chris, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that? Maybe tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks for having me. As said, my name's Chris. I moved to Australia in 2020 after my marriage broke down. My ex-wife wanted to come here and live with our daughter because she grew up here. And so I just moved really to stay local to my daughter and stay part of her upbringing. As for me, I've worked in software and technology for the last 10 years, and I'm now venturing into the world of acting. I also do a bit of podcasting. I have done in the past and will be doing some in the future. So those are the things I like.
Okay, love that. All right. I'm in the tech space too, so I always tell people it's the way to go. That's the space to be in.
Yeah,
Um,
feel free, free
yeah,
form.
yeah. Okay. We gonna get into that as well. Um, and especially
Sure.
with you navigating into more of a creative space. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how that experience has been for you as far as living in Australia. Do they even have an entertainment scene like that? Or like
You know what?
what?
Funnily enough, one of the first projects I've done so far was a commercial for Google, which has just been released, I think, in the
Oh,
last week. But it features Kiki Palmer in it, so that's pretty cool to have on my resume. And yeah, there is a fair bit of filming that's done here. I don't know if it's cost or like the landscape or what it is, but um, yeah, there are some opportunities here, and I guess I'm kind of finding out as I go. Mhm.
as far as like you've been in London for pretty much all your life until you just moved to Australia, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, how was it like growing up in London?
Um, so London, I'd say one thing I love about London that I appreciate a lot more having left is like it's super diverse. Um, it was, it's cold, as most people know. It can get gritty out there. I don't know if you've seen like any of the kind of TV shows, but depending on which ones you might watch, you might get a completely different picture. It's definitely not tea and crumpets where I'm from, at least. Anyway, so I'm from an area called Hackney, which is in East London, and yeah, I'd say like the sense of community is pretty strong, especially amongst people who are sort of first generation uh, immigrants or second generation, whatever it may be. But in general, I'd say it's interesting. You have this theme ongoing of survival because the cost of living is always rising, and it's expensive just to live. But then at the same time, you kind of find some joy in the rat race, if that makes sense, and you kind of take those small pockets of joy and find gratitude in that. And I guess it builds you in a way where you feel like you can go out and prosper elsewhere in the world.
Survival mode. As far as is that maybe tied into like the job market or just kind of like from a political scale or like how is that
Mm,
Can you elaborate a little bit more on survival mode?
Sure. I'd say survival mode looks different depending on who you are, where you are, but I guess the first thing that everyone's kind of in survival mode on is, trying to build wealth, trying to even pay rent and pay essential bills in the first place, because London is an expensive city to live in. Then there's other layers. So, for example, as a young black boy growing up in London, there is, a fair share of violence and crime that happens, and you can easily, very, very easily, become a part of that before you realize it. So that's something that a challenge I've faced, I say, and just being safe sometimes, because the thing with London is there's contrast in that there's some really kind of presentable and historically kind of famous sites and interesting places to be, and then you can turn the corner and be in, a pretty unsafe area just because of the amount of different activities that are going on there. But then even within that, a lot of a lot of people who are partaking in such are just doing so because they need another way to make money or they need another way to survive. And so, yeah, I just mean from a dog eat dog kind of like perspective when I speak on survival on that layer.
Okay. Okay. Sounds a lot like America.
It was
Oh
more
gosh.
similar than people would like to believe. Yeah, yeah. There is a show called Top Boy that I think people are getting a little bit more familiar with that side of London now. I'm not gonna say it's like super accurate, but it's definitely got a lot of realism in kind of like the feel and the mannerisms of people, the slang, all that kind of stuff. It captures it pretty well. So yeah, I recommend that as an insight to, I guess, the hood side of London.
Okay. Did you ever picture a world where you would no longer be living in London or in the UK in general?
Um, yes and no. I think when you're in the reality of London, you don't see why you should leave or why um it, there's anything that might be better. I think there's like and there's also a mentality, that London is, like the place to be, and for many reasons it is. But I feel like in my sort of early to mid 20s, I definitely started to have thoughts that this isn't where I was going to end up. And that might be because when I was in my late teens, maybe 19 or 18, my mum moved us out of London. And I spent like a year kind of, and it was a small town. It wasn't, anything particularly special. It was like an hour outside of London. But it made me understand, that there was more to life than living in London, and open up my mind. And so by my mid 20s, I did start thinking, I just had this gut feeling I wasn't going to end up in London. And I didn't know where, but I just knew, maybe I need to be somewhere else.
Okay. I've had those feelings too as a youth. Um, actually, I think I might have been 7 or 8. Um, in the social studies class and watching
Mm.
documentaries about different countries, and I realized, what? You mean to tell me there's more than what I already know, and no one told me, and I had to had to sit here and watch on a documentary to figure that out. That's crazy to me. But um, I guess I digress because this is the Chris show. We here to understand a little bit more
No,
about
by
you.
all means. It's interesting
um,
because it's interesting you say that, because I feel like um, my from an outside looking in, my view of America is that like America is propelled as like, you know the land of everyone else's dreams around the world, and the land that everyone else is trying to get to, and we have it all here, and you just need to see it. So it's interesting that you say that, because I wouldn't think it's commonplace to envision yourself outside of America for Americans. I, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it, like, just people have their different viewpoints on this topic, but I've always been a curious kid, always just wanting to
Mm,
know more about how things work, and like why do we even exist? Like why does this place exist? And the moment I realized I had relatives in other like cities, I'm like in cities and states, and I'm just like, why aren't we venturing out? I don't know. Like my folks, they are kind of just in a bubble, like bubble, and I always wondered if other people felt like they were just in a bubble too, like not knowing that there was
mm,
more. And if you did realize that, hey, there could be more than life, like at what point did you realize that? And some people realize and they just don't, you know think more of
mm,
it, and some people do think more of it. And um I mean, my
mm.
upbringing wasn't bad. um Not like
And you're from the Midwest,
don't have like
is
a
that
silver
right?
spoon or anything like that. No, I'm actually from South Carolina, from a very, very
Ah,
small
okay,
town
right.
of like
So,
500.
right.
um, yeah. So my viewpoint was that little small town of 500 people. So I
Wow.
don't,
Okay, yeah.
like, you came from a place where there's like I guess like square foot
Population
wise, it's
wise,
twice the size of New York. Population wise,
it's,
I'm not
yeah,
sure,
but
but
there's
like
also
I,
like
I
11
can
million.
imagine it's a lot of people.
Mm, yeah, yeah. It's
Dang.
about 11, yeah, million people in London. Yeah, I think last I remember looking it up, it was 10 or 11 million. And yeah, the city is um not in terms of land. I think it's like 50, maybe 50 miles from one side to the other. I could be wrong. But yeah, the UK, funnily enough, the whole of the UK fits into one state here in Australia called New South Wales. It fits inside that. So yeah, landmass wise, you've got essentially you have a lot of people in a very small space. You're living on top of each other. So this is why I say like survival, and kind of like, because you're competing for everything. You go out as a child, you go to the playground across the street, and you go and play football, you're going to become a good player just by way of the amount of other kids that are there that you're competing against. Having a fun kick around social game, older kids come and bully you off the football, and it's just, you maneuver around things, or you learn to like take on the impact of stuff. You don't cry. You don't. You get on with it. So that's it's very toughening in that way as well.
Okay. So Australia, we're gonna talk about that now. We're gonna talk about Australia for a bit.
Sure.
Um, I am curious because I know you said you moved there for family. Um,
Mhm.
how how was it, the overall experience of being there? Because you've been there for how long? You said
I've been here
in
4 years
Australia,
now.
4 years.
In Australia, yeah, coming up to 5. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Um.
from just like a mental emotional aspect, how was that process for you moving?
mm,
You moved to a whole different continent, whole few time
yeah.
zones over. Like, do you even? Okay, we just gonna. I got so many questions. We're just gonna start with just overall, like mentally, like how has this process been for you? Because I'm sure that's like knowing now
Mm,
that you maybe like you thought of leaving London, but you wasn't sure like how that was gonna happen or where you was gonna go, and now you're in a place where you moved for a family, but how was that for you?
Extremely tough. I won't even lie about it. Extremely tough. So I had split with my ex-wife about 6 months before moving, and at the time I was part of a support group specifically for Black fathers in the UK. And I even it wasn't a second thought in my mind about going, because in my own life, I missed my dad's presence for a large portion of my childhood. And so I knew I wasn't, before I ever became a father, I always knew I wasn't going to allow my child to have that story about me. I wanted to break that cycle. So I was dead set on traveling. And I remember actually, even within the support group, and remember, this is a support group specifically for dads and trying to like support and promote dads being involved. There were people within the group who said to me, if they were in the same position, they wouldn't travel, they wouldn't do it, because, and I understood the argument, which was they'd prefer to kind of maintain their happiness and let that um, transfer to their child as and when they were able to see their child, be it 2, 3, 4 times a year, rather than move somewhere and risk becoming a shadow of themselves, just to be consistent in their child's life, but not necessarily happy in their own, right? Because I guess whatever we feed ourselves is the only thing we can feed into our relationships, right? But yeah, I took the choice to move anyway, because I thought I will always regret it if I don't try. So I moved about 2 weeks before they closed the borders here for COVID restrictions.
Thank goodness.
And
Yeah.
yeah, thank goodness I did. Yeah, because I would have been locked out for, I think it was like 18 months at least that they had the borders closed. I can't remember exactly, but it was a long time. So I made it over. The first few months I was in the same city as them for like 2 or 3 months. And I'd see my daughter like three times a week, usually facilitated by my ex's parents. And then I had, as part of my plan, again, another kind of blessing I had was the job I was working at the time had an office in Australia, and said to me I could transfer to that office, so it meant I didn't have to look for a job, which was really cool. The only kind of slight setback to that was that it was in a different city from where my daughter was living. So they were living at that time in Sydney, but the office was in Melbourne, which is about 9 hours drive, or an hour's flight away. So it's in Melbourne is like the southeast of Australia, and Sydney's on the east coast, sort of halfway up the coastline. So yes, I moved to Melbourne, and then I was visiting them every 2 weeks. I'd go to see my daughter. I'd fly in, fly out. Um, the challenge I faced in Melbourne was, well, in Australia overall, I guess the first thing was I didn't really know anybody here. I had like three or four people I had known before I moved, um, but no one I was super close with or anything like that. I don't have any family here. And so, living in Melbourne, I really had to try and establish myself and kind of build my own sort of community here. But there was another block in the way of that, which was that the lockdowns that took place here were quite severe. They had like five, I think you couldn't go further than 5 kilometers from your home. obviously there were no like public kind of facilities that were open, and stuff like that, you know. So what that meant was I was restricted to meeting people online. So I started to meet people online, and just kind of prepare them as friends for when the lockdown ended. And I did that. I did that fairly successfully. I met, you know, a handful of people that are still my friends now. Some of them introduced me to other people and so forth. And so I kind of built a small kind of network out here in Melbourne. Um, yeah. And then after a year, and when the lockdown ended, the company I was working for went fully remote. And that allowed me to move back to Sydney, where my daughter was. So at that point, I was living a local distance from my daughter and seeing her frequently. But yeah, the events kept coming in thick and fast, and I don't know how far you want me to go with that, but I can I can share more. I mean, so when I moved back there, I got into a relationship, and that was the first relationship I had been in outside of my divorce, and the first relationship within which I introduced uh, my partner at the time to my daughter. And so that was another stepping stone, because you know there was some, I guess, growth and discomfort to go through with that. But you know, I really made sure it was a meaningful, you know, kind of connection. And although like I'm not in that relationship anymore, I still count that person as one of my closest friends here, because you know, she was super supportive. Um, but yeah, the next 2 years I spent in Sydney with my, as I said, at you know, local distance to my daughter. And then last year, um, I found out that my mum had fallen ill, um, with essentially with cancer. And so I was really close to leaving and going back home. But something I haven't mentioned already is that at the time, the visa that I was using had a restriction, which meant that I couldn't leave the country, or I'd need to restart the visa process, because I didn't have a permanent residence yet. And so I faced that kind of conundrum of whether or not I was going to leave and go see my mum. And I spoke to her, and you know, she, I guess, like mums do, gave me her assurances that she, you know, was going to fight and she was going to be okay. Um, and yeah, I was really stuck with what to do. I lost my job to redundancy at that point. So it was just, and then my relationship ended. This was all like within sort of probably 6 weeks. So like, you know, the world came crashing down, and yeah, I started to really just spiral into a really deep state of depression, and I had to fight. And honestly, I don't know how I did it, but I know it was day by day. I know that it wasn't like there was no big plan, there was no big push, there was no big miracle. It was just, how am I going to get through today, for quite a while. Yeah, I'm sorry to pour it on, but yeah, that's kind of uh, the journey. Moving through to this year,
Sorry.
that's okay. I mean, I'll pause. Yeah, so I guess are
Sorry,
we
you
good? Yeah,
can
so
keep going. I'm a crybaby.
that's I'll take that as empathy, and I appreciate it. Yeah. Moving towards the end of last year, I got the news from my mum that she had the all clear, which, I can't say I've ever felt more overwhelming sense of joy than that day. So at this time I'm on my own. I'm doing what I have to do. I was working in a warehouse at this point, which is, not to look down or anything on anyone who works in the warehouse, but I was just out of my, depth, going from remote working in software to like intense physical labor for half the salary. And it was just so literally, everything I was doing felt like survival. I had to meditate every day. I remember doing like really late shifts in the warehouse, like when there were barely anyone left, and like breaking down, or I'd be like pushing like a really heavy like trolley with goods in it, and just like in tears at the same time, like fighting through tears to like scan boxes and stuff like that. It was really surreal to think about now. But yeah, I got the news that my mum had all clear and was, on a road to recovery, which, yeah, like I say, is the best news I could ever get for that year. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, that really kind of inspired me. My mum's fight, because my mum, I grew up in a single parent household. My
Can you
mum,
give me
I
just
think,
a
taught me.
moment? I'm sorry. I need some
Yeah,
tissue.
sure,
I
sure,
need
sure,
some
go for
tissue. Like
it. Right.
I didn't think the waterworks were coming today. Give me just a few seconds. The waterworks is coming
That's
from everywhere. It's not
mm,
funny, but like I resonate with you. That's why I'm like ugh, trying to hold it together. But yeah, hold on for just a moment. Okay, I'm here. Thank you for
mm.
your
Oh, thanks.
patience. Okay.
That's totally fine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look,
Please continue.
yeah, yeah. I think I'm saying all of this without and tuning out from actually feeling it, just because I know where it takes me. And yeah, I guess I was saying that growing up, in a single parent household. I have three sisters. So I grew up with, all women in the household, and I think when I think about what I learned from my mum, I'd say the first thing is it was survival, and it wasn't because she sat down and spoke to me about how to survive. It was because I realized that her love for us was through her working 2 to 3 jobs at a time, was through her keeping a house over our head that she owned, and was through food on the table, and was through. So it's strange, because it's almost like the type of love that you associate typically with a man. But obviously she was doing both jobs, and so like when I've been in therapy and I've um thought, or if I've had thoughts about my love languages or stuff like that, I'm like, my mum didn't really hug me loads when I was a kid, but she was always open to a hug, but it was just like she was occupied, she and I guess it let me humanize her, because we all start off with our parents on this pedestal, um, as to who they are and what they're capable of, because they are our protection, they are our guidance, and they're all these things. Um, yeah, and so I say that to say, like, I think I realized, when my mum told me, that she was doing better and that she was clear, was that if she could fight that, um, you know, I needed to continue this fight, because I'm not going to exist in a world with children who don't know who I am, or what value I bring, or what, they got from me, or where they're from. Another thing I should mention is my ex-wife is from Egyptian descent, so Arab background, whereas obviously I'm black. My mum came from Ghana, or comes from Ghana, and so yeah, I'm super keen for my daughter to understand and be close to that part of her identity, because you know, in my opinion, and widely, the world is going to view her as a black girl, and so I want to protect that part of her identity, knowing as well that I'm in a country where um, black people are less, kind of a lesser part of the population, and I wouldn't say like it's something I'm fearful of, but it is something to be protected. The black experience here, if not from ignorance, if nothing else, just because we're less commonplace here, and I see like how racism rears its head in Australia. It's very different. It is largely through just like unfamiliarity rather than like outright kind of hatred for black people. But all the same, it's a cause for me to reinforce her strength in her identity. So yeah, so that's super important as well to me. Um, yeah, and then I guess this year has been kind of a year of resurgence for me. I'm still facing challenges, but as I said, I've recently like taken steps into the acting world. I just finished a commercial for Google Pixel, which is out now. Has recently been used, and yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more work. I've done a fight scene in a film as well, and yeah, I'm just looking forward to really getting back into my creative flow. I used to do a lot of music once upon a time and stuff like that, so I'm just really trying to jump back in that, and just things that fuel me, things that get the best of me, and things that I'd love to show my daughter the results of, and inspire her to.
Gosh, I'm really glad um that you stayed true to yourself at the beginning of this process. Um, I think it's healthy to have a support group when it comes to fatherhood, especially something that, wasn't really present for you, but something that is very valuable to you. And, you're living in that moment. And so it's healthy to be able to have that support and get advice and just get better understanding of what it means to be in that world. And throughout all the advice that you were given, you really just said, you know what, I'm still gonna leave anyways because this is what really matters to me, and I'm gonna see it through. Um, I know when I relocated, I didn't think so much about, like, I thought about family, but not of what or how it would affect me if someone's health went left. That's my eyes were already tearing up when you were talking about like you wanting to be there for your daughter. But I had a situation where my best friend passed and during COVID, and I couldn't even go to her
So lost
funeral.
a friend
You
during
know,
COVID as well. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
really sorry
So
for.
yeah, that was. Yeah, I'm really happy that everything worked out for your mom. I was about to I probably would have needed a 10-minute break if you would have told me she didn't make it. But um yeah, COVID has been a very crazy time for a lot of people. And I think moving is just one aspect of that. You being in a space where you can't just easily hop up and just drive to be with your loved one
Yeah.
in that moment.
Mm.
That's tough. It's really it's difficult to process when you can't be readily available when the people that you love are in like such dire need like that. Um it and then trying to navigate that and your transition and being in a new space. It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with, and
Mm.
um,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah, I
Yeah.
I
And
really appreciate you sharing
the
that.
no, thanks for providing the platform for sure. I think it's important because yeah, like I could talk about and perhaps you want me to talk about like the differences in culture and stuff like that here as well, but like all of that was completely secondary, I guess, to yeah, the the conflict of being here for my child versus all the other people I love and know well. All of my support, I mean, not all, but like largely a lot of my support has come remotely because, the people who know me best are all back in the UK. And, it takes a while to form the kind of bond that allows you to lean into like that safe space with someone who you've only met or known for a year or 2 years. And so my relationship that I was in um definitely took a lot of that weight away, but at the same time it kind of, in my view, meant that the relationship itself suffered a fair bit as well. I didn't mention, and I have to mention that I also lost a friend, a close friend, someone I had known since age 11, in 2021. And he also has a daughter who I think she's 12 now. And yeah, again, like it just kind of reminded me, that at any minute it could be our time. And, she has, well, I think she would have been 9 or 10 when he passed. So she has that much of memory with him. And yeah, again, it inspired me to um to stick with this mission of making sure my daughter knows me and knows, and gain something from this bond that we have. Um Yeah, but since then they've moved to a different town, which is a little bit more of a small town, kind of beach town, and it's a lot further away, and so it is harder now. But it's hard is not enough to stop me from doing what I need to do. I didn't move to that town just because job opportunities would have been limited. I also didn't want to face the prospect of having to re-establish new connections again. And just generally the scope of things, it didn't fit me. And so I'm trying to meet that balance of like serving my own happiness and giving the best version of myself to my fatherhood journey, rather than make decisions that are gonna not serve my happiness, but potentially allow me to be more present. Because being more present doesn't necessarily mean there's greater benefit if you're not in the mindset or in the energy of putting your best, feeding your best, putting your best foot forward into the relationships that you serve. So that's how I want to serve my daughter, and I hope that she understands that when she gets older, that I've tried to meet that balance.
You're a brave man.
Yeah,
You're brave.
I appreciate that. I think bravery is one of those things that you don't attribute to yourself. You just do things and let it be called what it is. But I do appreciate that. Yeah, I guess it also comes from not seeing when your determination to achieve something is so high, you don't look at things as like a choice. If you're scared to jump out of a plane, which is a pretty healthy fear to have, and skydive or whatever, then you contemplate your choices, before you do it. Whereas if you're a real thrill seeker and this is something you have to get on your bucket list, you just you just jump, right? You get in a plane and you just jump, and I guess that's how I see like this whole fatherhood thing for me. You know, if God willing, I have more kids. You know, I'm gonna apply myself the same way, but um, I'm not going to like abandon this journey just because it's been made tough. I'm here to push on.
Are there any support groups or maybe any like uh is there anything like you've done like while you've been there to just kind of uh move forward and kind of overcome some of the emotional and the mental obstacles that you went through? I know you
Mm.
mentioned
Yeah.
there were a few like people that you met, but I mean, are there fatherhood groups in Australia or in your community? Maybe any like specifically for Black fathers? Like, how's that process been for you?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess something I've had to do, and I'm a very like social person. I guess you would class me as extrovert in that I get energized being around people. I've always been that way. So something I've learned the hard way here is that I've had to like really learn to be comfortable alone before I look outwards. But I did, when I first came here, form a group. It was just like a group on WhatsApp for Black fathers, and I had a handful of people in there, but it was pretty quiet. You know, maybe like two or three people would regularly chat, and the others were kind of, you know, not so active. And something I found that's different in Australia compared to the UK, I guess, is that Australia's a pretty good quality of life overall, and it's pretty comfortable living. And so, yeah, a lot of people just chase this dream of kind of house, kids, car, and that's it, and then they're set. You know, they don't kind of aspire to much more than that. And I don't knock that. You know, I don't make that wrong. Because especially, you know, if you've come from, you know, worse, right? But I guess I say that to say, when people are comfortable, um, the need is less, right? And so in my the need for support, sorry, I should say, is less. So in my experience in the London group, you know, we had a lot of dads who were separated or dads who couldn't work out, you know, a, a schedule for childcare, or who had this problem or that problem. And so it was good to like be united in that, and not feel alone, and be able to relate, and kind of work our way through it. Whereas here, you know, most of the dads I met were kind of happy, established, and, you know, didn't want or need for much. And so, yeah, I guess it meant that apart from the nice thing of being connected to other Black fathers, there wasn't really much they could contribute, in on the side of problem solving solutions, or just generally wanting to be a little bit more open and use the space in a, you know, therapeutic way. I think people here assimilate a lot as well, and maybe don't see or feel so much of an urge to unite uh, in blackness, let me say, or you know, yeah, just unite in a way where we kind of support each other, you know, a little bit more. And so, yeah, essentially, I did have a group. I disbanded it, and then I still keep in touch with some of the guys here and there. But yeah, I've also, you know, been on and off with therapy just based on affordability. but I actually found an African American therapist I was using for a while. Pretty cool guy. And yeah, other than that, like I say, self maintenance. So meditation, prayer for sure, and just finding things that helped me kind of refocus. Exercise. There's no one magic thing that does the trick. I think it was my journey has been finding things that help me, and so yeah, getting back into like creative performance and stuff like that has also been part of it too.
One day at a time.
Yeah, exactly that.
One
Exactly
day at
that.
a time.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. Even something else actually I should mention that as being useful is sometimes just being involved in conversations online that are meaningful, interesting, and that's how we came across each other, right? So although like I go into threads or Twitter or X or whatever they call it now, and it can be really super like American centric, but there's still common ground, right? And so like I like to here and there I'll interact with people and yeah, get involved in topical discussions and stuff like that as well.
I know you mentioned you want your daughter to be able to kind of get like the full like experience of her background, who she is, and like get um like more exposure to like her African roots, being able to connect, in that regard. Um, I have no idea of how like Black culture works in Australia. Like, are there even libraries or museums where um like there's information about Black history? Like you said, the population was like, in the minority, but like how minority is it, and like how's the history there as it relates to Black people? Do they even consider
Yeah.
themselves as Black? I have so many questions.
Yeah, yeah. So funnily enough, this is something I've been exploring ever since I've been here through some podcast interviews I did on the podcast platform that I used to be part of called Dope Black Dads. And also just through my own interest, right? And Black here is really diverse and really complex. So first and foremost, you have the indigenous population or Aboriginals, as they're widely known, right? And they have a super interesting story that I hesitate to summarize, but I will try. And I will take all criticism on this from my Indigenous friends. But in short, obviously, they were colonized by the British who came here intending to use Australia as a place to send sort of prisoners and stuff like that. So they were colonized. They had their land taken from them. They, then also had their children taken from them. So as part of, I guess, some crazed scheme to integrate, with the indigenous population, it probably was more of a scheme to wipe them out. The children were taken away and given um, to colonizer families, and so and then drugs and alcohol were introduced into the communities, the indigenous communities, and so this over time took its toll and I guess set them back in terms of their um, progress with how the country was developing, and so now you see it now, unfortunately, a lot of the indigenous population here are kind of riddled with addiction issues and homelessness issues, and they're generally just fighting to be recognized as equal. I know that they're disproportionately incarcerated, especially as youth as well. And, there's a lot of trauma, in their community. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm really trying to learn more about and be more aware of. But equally, there are a lot of like programs and funding and different ways that I guess the current Australian establishment is trying to, bring the balance back. But, it's the only country, I'm told, that doesn't have a treaty with its Indigenous people, which for me is nuts because, if you want to put on if you want to, you know, have all these awards and all these programs, but you don't have a treaty, then it's a facade to me. And then the other groups of Black people here, there are a lot of migrants directly from Africa. So refugees, for example, from Sudan and Southern Sudan. And then you have Southern Africans here. There's a large South African population, but they have both Black South Africans and coloureds, which is, I don't know what coloureds means in America, but in the UK, it's quite an outdated, offensive term for Black people. And I only found out here, because I never had any coloured South African friends prior, that it's actually its own like ethnic group of people from, if you go further back, their backgrounds really mixed, like there's Asian in there, there's Black in there, there's just all sorts. But the look they have commonly is like they look like they're either Black and white mixed or slightly Black and Asian mixed, Black and South Asian mixed. Yeah, so it's like, but yeah, I've met a lot of people from the South African color community, and I would personally count them as Black just because they're living the experience of non-white. And then yeah, there's a handful of Black British people. I haven't met too many, to be honest, but I've met a couple, and I've met some African Americans here as well, because the basketball scene here is quite big, and a lot of people move here for that to play professional basketball. So yeah, there's different walks of Black life, and so I guess that's another challenge in like uniting under the banner of Blackness, right? Because everyone's lived experiences are so different. I wouldn't say there's also, I have to mention, Melanesians. So like people from the Pacific Islands that are within sort of proximity of Australia. Yeah, so Fiji, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, their complexion really heavily varies from like sort of looking maybe like Eastern Asian to straight up blackety black like me. So yeah, and again, they're culturally quite different again from like a westernized Black person. So yeah, there's such a wide and diverse range of Blackness here that maybe uniting under Blackness makes less sense for that reason, and maybe it's more there's just closeness in being other, in not being white, and not and then there are some people who are probably more at home here because they're from somewhere close to Australia, and they've got like a thing where there's loads of their community here, so they kind of stick with their community, and they don't feel in any way like they're marginalized, which is good, I guess, in some ways. But yeah, I always find it tricky when I'm walking down the street and I see someone who's close to or as dark as me, and I give them the nod because you don't always get the nod back.
Nod is universal. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I thought
Uh,
it was. Yeah.
oh wait, so it's not universal.
So I would
Denied.
say nah. I would say nah. I'd say it really varies, you know. But yeah, I guess it feels easy to get into conversation with people and to like chat with people, but it doesn't always feel like they relate to you, if that makes sense. There's a sense of like segregation because people just kind of want to stick with who they know and what they know. I guess it's a large island, right? So it's an island mentality in some respects. But um, if there's anywhere that is more integrated than anywhere else, it's probably Melbourne again. That's something I recognize about Melbourne. Sydney and the other cities I've been to, Brisbane, there's equal amounts of uh, black people to be found or people of color to be found, but I'd say they're a little bit more segregated from each other um, in their communities.
Okay. Okay. I feel like that matters, especially you're in a space where, you're trying to cultivate that balance or that connection with like your daughter's roots, um, as it relates to where she currently resides. And you
Mm.
that's something you want her to know, like probably early on in life, and just
Mm.
trying to
Mm.
find out like how to reinforce that information, that culturally, like how to really bring that together in a way that's like visually like apparent for her, um or like even if like I personally, like I can just go to a library and just pick up a book if I want to
Mm.
learn more about like certain things. I just ordered the book
Mm.
today to better understand kind of like how my ancestors were treated. I mean, I learned some things in school, but now we know that some things may have been a little bit whitewashed. So I like to go and grab some books. I mean, now like that's something I've never thought of, um,
Mm.
like having a family and wanting to do that, and how accessible is that information in a different
Mm.
country. It's a lot to think
Yeah,
about.
and it's yeah, I did find out actually there is like a black centric library here that has been curated by a group called the African Youth Collective. I want to say their name is. I hope I got that right. And I only found that out because, funnily enough, Dr. Umar came over to Australia and there was a always a mixed reaction when that name is said. Um, but he came over, and it was that group that hosted him in like a university lecture room, and so I went to sit there and kind of listen and ask questions to him, and I found out about that library there. But yeah, I can't imagine it's something that's everywhere in Australia, but there is one here. Yeah, and we do buy books that kind of reinforce pride in identity. I think they're a little bit more. I think the books that we've bought so far, my ex-wife and I, are a little bit more ambiguous in terms of not being specific to being black and having curly hair and all the rest. But there are a few that are. Yeah, and I'm going to try and make sure that momentum continues.
I have two more questions. I'm gonna let you go. I did say an hour, but like, dang, this conversation's been good. Like every day, I'm learning about different things that I would have never imagined is like very comparable to what's like happening in the States. And like that's another reason I'm like,
Mm.
I just want to get out the bubble. I wanna understand more, and what a better opportunity to do that than right now, the present. So
Yeah. Well, I also mentioned. Yeah, sorry, I'll let you fire away. I'll let you fire away.
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I also
Speak,
mentioned
speak
like
from the heart.
a friend who shout out to Kerristen. Funnily enough, she's got a name not too far off of yours. She is from the DC area. I think she grew up in. And I met her here, really good friend of mine, and she lived here for I think almost 6 years. I could be wrong, but she would be super useful to speak to just because of having the balance of coming from the same country and having a similar experience, but also having lived here for quite a while. I believe she's in Mexico now, living in Mexico, but I have to catch up with her because she's been a bit nomadic since she left Australia.
Dang, Mexico is a hot spot.
Yeah, seems like it.
Okay.
Seems like it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, two more questions. You mentioned therapy earlier. That was something that you took advantage of. Um, was this therapist based out of Australia?
Yeah, based in
Okay.
here in Melbourne. I think his
Okay.
story is his partner is Australian. Yeah.
Okay, that's neat. That's neat. How's healthcare? Um, that's a question that I've been getting from quite a few people, and I know you mentioned affordability of therapy. So now that makes me wonder, like, how's healthcare in
Mm.
general? Because I consider therapy as a form of healthcare.
Mhm. So
Um,
therapy, I went
yeah.
privately. I never got it through any kind of public uh, system, but I sought out the therapist because they have like a register, so you can seek out therapists and like put in certain parameters to narrow down your search and stuff like that. Um, but healthcare, I guess, have I used healthcare much here? I mean, I've used a dentist, really, that's it. I mean, yeah, I've been to hospital once, actually. Oh my goodness. Oh, I forgot about that. I think it was food poisoning. To this day, I don't really know what it was, but I was driving on a country road and the nauseousness just took over me and I had to stop at this like rest stops. So they have these rest stops where like there's no like fuel station or facilities around. There's just like a bathroom and a couple of benches, right? And I found this rest stop, stopped, and basically threw up like crazy, like the Exorcist type from crazy. And so this guy who was passing by calls an ambulance on my behalf. And then I go to hospital. Yeah, I was looked after. I mean, it's different from what I'm used to because in the UK, healthcare is obviously under the National Health Service, the NHS, so you don't pay for anything. But here, like, you pay for the ambulance, you pay for yeah, you get billed. But I know that's the case in the States as well. So nothing you're not used to. But yeah, there's a lot of doctors here. I think that's a popular profession that people migrate to do here. Nurses and doctors. So actually, the doctor I had was British, and that was weird because I was like really in the middle of nowhere in this small town. Um, and it's fine. It's the quality that you would expect, if not better. Like, yeah,
Okay. Sorry, two more questions as of right now. Um, kid
go for it.
safety and kid healthcare. Kind
Mm.
of got another question about that. Just overall, like children, like is it like is Australia a relatively safe space for children when it comes to just like health and well-being and like
Yeah, I'd
and
say it's extremely
crime,
safe.
like
Mm.
okay.
I'd say super, super safe. Like, obviously crime against children can happen anywhere, but it's not something I've heard a lot about. Um, it's one of the leading reasons why I wanted my daughter to grow up here. To be honest, why I wasn't against her growing up here compared to London, super safe. Like, the residential streets, kids can play in the street. It's almost like what um once was possible in London, definitely isn't now. But yeah, there's plenty of facilities, playgrounds. There's also like, gymnast clubs and stuff like that. They're big on swimming, so you'll find like loads of kids go to the beach or to a swimming pool. There's so much for children. I'd say that might be the one of, if not the best things about Australia, is just like as a child, to grow up here for me is a big privilege, and I think that if anything, I fear my my daughter being out of touch with what the rest of the world is like, because it's like that
Mm,
dreamy here. So that's another balance that I will try to address as a dad. Yeah.
okay. I love that for my mommy friends and anyone out there who may be listening with a family who's just like, oh, what's it like to be in Australia? So, okay, alrighty. Well, very last question, I promise. It's a question that I ask everyone. Um, so you've been in Australia for 4-ish years, yeah, ish years. Now that you've relocated and had a chance to settle and really get to experience the ebbs and flows of life as an Australian, um, what words of advice would you provide to the version of yourself that was in the city that you relocated from?
So from London, or from
Yes.
between?
Like
Okay.
the
What words of advice?
yeah, like what
Mm,
yeah, what type of advice would you provide to the version of
mm,
yourself that was in London?
mm. I think first thing I would say is like to prepare to be on your own and find healthy practices um for your time alone, to maintain yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, because they're going to be super important. That's the first thing I'd definitely say. The second thing is like not to forget your mission, and just like, stay focused and look for inspiration, look for reasons to be grateful, because that's really powered me forward, reasons to be grateful. Especially when things get tough, you know. So those are the two. And then, yeah, the third one would just be to stay present, um, because, the past, thinking about the past can bring fond memory, but it can also make you long for what is no longer. And when you think about the future too much, you create anxiety about how you're going to reach this picture that you've painted. But when you're in the present, you consistently start to appreciate what is, give up attachment to what isn't, and allow yourself to be hopeful and confident in who you are today and what makes you who you are, and also be accountable for like where you're at, because that's important too. Yeah. So summary: staying present, preparing for your practices alone, and I really can't remember the second thing I said now, but yeah, those three are super important.
Thank you for joining me. Like, I really appreciate you for just being vulnerable and just using this space to share your story. Um, I think you may be no, you're actually the second um person I've spoken to, second father. Um, I can't remember what I told you earlier. I think I mentioned like you may have been the first, but no, you're the second. But you're the first person with this like story, like this pretty like unique like story. Um, I wish you absolutely nothing but the best with your um, career. Um, I hope that your creativity takes you to new heights and it brings you a lot of like healing and growth. And I just, I, I want nothing but the best for you, really, because the journey of relocating in itself is it's a battle. It's like an uphill battle to just be in a better mental space and to be the best version of yourself. It literally challenges you to be the best version of yourself because you're alone and you have to really be a special person to know that and still move forward, especially when life just throws you a whole bunch of lemons you were not expecting. So and you're doing all of
Yeah.
that while raising a child. It's a lot, but I really commend you. I commend you for doing what a lot of people probably couldn't do or wouldn't want to do. Like you did it anyways, and your internet cousins are rooting for you. I know I am.
No, look, I super appreciate I super appreciate this platform, this opportunity to share, things that I haven't actually shared to this extent, at least, um, online, publicly. And yeah, I appreciate you even approaching me to speak more about this. I think it's a good thing because although it's the Relocate podcast, it's bigger than that. Now I see it's everything that comes with relocating, and that's more than just moving boxes and furniture or whatever. You're taking your life with you, you're taking your experiences with you, but yeah, you're also taking that into a whole new environment and trying to fit and belong in this new place. And so you physically move, but you also spiritually, mentally move, right? Because yeah, you have to adapt, and I guess adapting is supposed to be one of like our strongest traits as human beings, and I hope it remains one of mine. And yeah, I guess like I always just want to remain in a mindset that even if something isn't easy, it doesn't mean it's not of great value, and probably that it is of greater value when it's not easy. So thank you for giving me the chance to um, put light on that. Yeah, it's been really good engaging, and yeah, I also wish you all the best with what you're doing as well. I think it's a great thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who has tuned in to this episode of the Relocate podcast. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for a brand new episode of someone's story of how they've made it through this crazy process called relocating. So, thank you and see you on the flip side.